we're here tonight to talk about the TPP. This is an event organised by Indie Media. For those that don't know, Indie Media is an international movement of citizen journalism. It came out of the Seattle demonstrations in the States. Here in Perth, we've had a website from around 2003, and we've had a radio show from 2004 over the road at Mount Lawley every Monday night around this time, 7 o'clock. So if you don't know about the radio show, tune in. We've got a sign-up sheet on the front door if you want to find out more about these events. We're planning to hold more public forums around issues like the TPP and others, so please put your name down on the contact list and make sure you find out about it. Anyway, as I said, this is all about the TPP, finding out more information and how we can get involved in stopping this insane deal. And to kick things off, we've got someone who's been very involved in that on a federal level. He's a long-time activist, relatively recent senator, and probably doesn't need much of an introduction. So we're going to kick it off with Green Senator Scott Ludlam.
I could probably just listen to Robert and Selena all night. You change up the format a little bit. It feels like a real honour to be up here. Thank you for your words, both. Thank you. Can I get a really quick show of hands? It's so great to see so many people here. I need a really quick show of hands. Hands up if you think the TPP is bad. Hands up. Keep your hand up if you think it's really, really, really bad. All right. So we're not here to talk about that it's bad. I guess that's probably going to be a bit of a waste of your time. I'm going to speak really briefly about kind of recent stuff, maybe what happened on the weekend, but I'm kind of keen that we get through the people talking and lecturing at you from up the front and get towards the what are we collectively going to do about it. And it's really great that there are so many people to be part of the conversation. Thanks to Karun and Ray and the other Indie Media crew for bringing us together as well. I was expecting there'd be maybe 24 of us, to be perfectly honest. It has been bloody hard, and it's in some of the kind of material around the promo material that the folks put together to get us here. So when is the surface tension of this issue going to break? This is gigantic. Where's the debate? Like, where is everybody? All right, here you are. I don't have to whinge about that. Two other really quick shows of hands, if that's okay. Who thinks that as a result of the hitch that happened on the weekend, it was meant to be their final meeting, that we can all relax, that everything's cool, and that the TPP is over, and we're basically here to celebrate? One hand. Richard, you've been around this caper longer than me, mate. Not many hands. Okay. And the other thing I just wanted to do was, can I just get a quick show of hands? How did you find out about tonight? Show us if you found out about it on Facebook. That's interesting. Hold that thought for a second. Did you find out about it because you heard somebody who said, I'm going to this thing and you should totally come? Word of mouth. Slightly less than Facebook. And what about reading about it in the front page piece on the West Australian about this catastrophic deal that's about to get signed and none of us have seen? None. Nobody. Okay. It is interesting, however, that it looked like a thin majority of us discovered this event through a really loathsome social media network owned by a United States corporation that has just obliterated our privacy before our eyes. So keep in mind a little bit, for folks who put your hand up because somebody told you about it, that is really important that our networks stay live and that we're not completely dependent on Mark Zuckerberg. Just a thought. So this is people call it a trade agreement. It's an investor's rights agreement. It's not really a free trade agreement in the way that we've been thinking of it. And it is so bad that even Andrew Robb is having second thoughts. Think about that for a second. A free trade agreement that the Abbott government is just going, ooh, okay, maybe we're not quite ready to sign this thing yet. That is important. And if you look at some of the technicalities of why they didn't come to agreement, this is the fourth time they've had a final meeting in which they're going to sign this thing. The fourth one of those. Folks who've been following this for a while might remember this time last year, there was a final meeting at which this thing was going to get signed and done. So they kind of keep edging it along and they keep hitting these very technical sticking points about, will the Japanese be allowed to use machine parts for the cars that they sell into the United States and Canada that are provided by Thailand, which is outside the TPP framework? technical as hell. I don't even know that. I didn't even know that that was Japanese negotiating position, but there you go. Will Australian sugar producers, principally in Queensland, get enough access to the United States market? It didn't fall over because the trade ministers, looking at the document, just were like, holy shit, this obliterates democracy. How can we possibly sign this thing off? We need to take this back to our respective jurisdictions and, you know, table the reports in our parliaments and see what people reckon. That is not why things seized up on Saturday and Sunday. It's because the kind of interlocking forces of transnational greed couldn't quite come to an agreement across the different jurisdictions about who was going to give way. And so they kind of inched closer to this thing. And that is why I think we can't relax now. When Andrew Robb says it's 98% done, he's probably exaggerating because they appear to be quite serious sticking points. When he says it's 98% done, two things go off in my head. Firstly, table the damn thing. If you're that close to it being completed, can we fucking read it, please? Can we have a look at the document that you're about to sign us up to if it's that close? And secondly, it's that it's 98% done. Now, maybe they are exaggerating because confidence is absolutely crucial in this stuff. They came away and said, the Japanese car thing, you know, it's kind of stuffed. There's no way that we're going to resolve that, or the sugar thing, or the, you know, making everybody's medicine more expensive here in Australia. Maybe that, you know, is a complete deal breaker and it can't be resolved and they're nowhere near 98%. Maybe that's true. But what came out in that statement from Rob was, we're 98% there. That is how close we are to signing this thing up. So now is the time, and that's why I want to get, I don't know how, you can read the articles, like you probably all read the articles, right, about the technicalities that it's hung up on. No one has seen the draft agreement outside those negotiators and the lobbyists. This is not an agreement being signed up between states. This is an agreement at which states send their trade representatives to run the arguments of particular industry sectors and particular lobby groups. The negotiators don't always necessarily even know what it is that they're asking for. The sugar people need that. The car people need that. The IP people need that. And they just go in there. The only people who've seen the text of the damn thing are those industry sectors on the other side of the world and those ones here who are pushing for access to agricultural markets and stuff. So I'm interested in getting to the part about what we can do about it because we have, you know, that phrase sovereignty is in my mind in some of that activist reading of this stuff, that Parliament is giving its sovereignty away. Now, Robert would remind us, I presume, that it is not the Australian Parliament's sovereignty to give away because it never had it in the first place, but the point being you can elect whoever you like to that Parliament when they continue to sign off agreements like this and you get there and you won't be able to pass certain kinds of laws without getting sued. That is how dangerous this thing is. Our democracy, as flawed and broken and imperfect as it is made considerably worse when you hand off these powers to corporations who basically only exist for the purpose of profit. That's what we're faced with. So I want to get to the point where we collectively come up with some clever ideas, and some people already haven't some, about what we're going to do about it. So, for example, I knew I would lose the little leaflet if you gave it to me. A fella called Matt gave me a thing, then I dropped it. Lucky Karoon has attention to detail. These guys are going to cart this, it looks like a kind of horseman of the apocalypse, dragging this hideous thing behind it. The flyer looks really good. Can you chuck your hand up, Matt? Matt's over there. So theatre and visibility, because the front page in the West, friends, isn't coming. They are not going to run it unless we are spectacularly out there and in people's faces. So let's hope that starts tonight. Thanks all so much for coming.
Hi everyone. Do you want me just to carry on? Everybody, I'm Melissa Parke, the Federal Member for Fremantle. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. And I would like to echo Scott's words about Robert and Selena's words. Very, very powerful words. Reminding us that while we're here to talk about very great potential injustices, there are already many terrible injustices that have not been addressed in this country, and that we must always have in mind. And I really appreciate you being here and talking about that. And I want to thank RTR FM Indie Media for putting this on, because this is, as Scott said, an issue that is really not getting the attention it deserves. I think the Australian people would be absolutely horrified en masse if they were to realise what was going on and what the government is proposing to sign us up to. Now, I know Scott said he didn't want to get into the technical detail. Can I just ask does everybody here understand all the technical detail, or would you like a little bit of background on this?
Background.
Bit of background? Okay. Okay. Well, firstly, I've got three main points, or from the other so-called free trade agreements that Australia has signed up to. The government claims that the TPP is about reducing tariffs and gaining access for farmers to markets. That's the line they're running. That's what you'll hear about dairy and sugar and cars and market access, but you don't hear about the other stuff. And it's the other stuff that's what it's really all about. It's about control of the regulatory framework of countries for the benefit of multinational corporations, for the benefit of big tobacco, big mining, big IT, big pharma. And in fact, as the Productivity Commission has found on a number of occasions, and has repeated very recently, these so-called free trade agreements are not balanced and reciprocal. Their economic benefit is marginal, confined to small gains in agricultural market access, while giving much, much more away. Now, this is the Productivity Commission. It's not the hotbed of lefty activism. This is the Productivity Commission saying this. The government claims that the free trade agreements that it's already entered into with Japan, South Korea and China, and that it is proposing to make on the TPP, are mutually constructive agreements that will result in stability and economic prosperity. Yet none of them have been subject to any cost-benefit analysis or independent assessment. So, for instance, on the Korea Free Trade Agreement, contains an extraordinary anomaly in relation to employment provisions that opens the door to virtually any Korean workers in Australia, but makes it almost impossible for Australians wanting to work in Korea. So there's a massive imbalance in that agreement. In the China Free Trade Agreement, the government has given Chinese companies a general right to buy resources and other assets in Australia, market access, without getting the same right for Australian companies in China. The government's made unprecedented concessions on temporary migrant labour. An MOU, which is separate from the text of the trade agreement, gives Chinese firms with as little as 15% investment in projects valued at over $150 million, rights to bring in unlimited numbers of temporary migrant workers without undertaking labour market testing, allowing Chinese firms to bypass local laws requiring advertising to first see if there are suitably qualified local workers available. And also, the minimum wage to be paid to the migrant workers will be negotiated between the company and the Department of Immigration, and it doesn't have to be Australian market rates. That's just, I'm just glossing over some of those issues very, very quickly. The other big thing to note about the Korea and Free Trade Agreements is that they both have investor-state dispute settlement clauses in them, and I'll come to that in just a moment. On the TPP, Australia already has free trade agreements with 9 out of the 11 other countries in the TPP. So you really have to wonder, what are the additional market gains that we're going to get from entering into the TPP? And a recent study by the US Department of Agriculture found 0 overall economic gains in GDP growth for Australia from the TPP. So we don't have any evidence of net benefit to Australia. And as Scott said, now that the TPP talks are on hold, it's an opportunity for us to say to the government, you should release the text, of course, and ask the Productivity Commission to undertake a cost-benefit analysis of the deal, which he says is 98% done and therefore should be available to be seen. The second main point about this deal is that there is an incredible amount of obscurity and secrecy around it, matching the government's approach in other areas like asylum seeker policy. Now, the only people who've been allowed to see the TPP text, apart from the government negotiators, have been industry, trade, lobbyists, representatives of multinational corporations. The community and political representatives have been locked out of it. And the only way we know anything at all about what's in the text is thanks to WikiLeaks. Now, MPs were given a general briefing by the department just in the last couple of weeks of Parliament when we were sat a month or so ago. And we received an offer to review the draft text. But it was conditional on MPs signing a 4-year confidentiality agreement, which kind of defeated the purpose of looking at it, because you couldn't be able to say anything about it afterwards. So most of us elected not to see it, and so we could keep talking about it. Now, the provisions that we have seen in the draft text relating to intellectual property, so patents and copyright primarily, are insidious. Normally these issues are debated openly and publicly through the World Trade Organisation's TRIPS processes, that is the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. Things like protections for health and access to medicines are built in to those multilateral processes. But having these TPP negotiations has meant that all of this can happen in secret, and all of those things that would normally be decided and debated publicly are now being done behind doors. And it's enabled the conclusion of provisions that would see the extension of patent and copyright terms and enforcement impacting on things like internet freedom, that I think Scott is probably best qualified to talk about, and the cost of medicines, not only for those of us in Australia, but for the poorest people in the world. And this is why organisations like MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, have been campaigning very strongly against the TPP, as have groups like the AMA, also not a hotbed of lefty activism, the Public Health Association, a huge number of I've got a list of them somewhere, organisations that are devoted to public health. Now, a recent WikiLeaks draft showed that the TPP would also include an ironically named Healthcare Transparency Annex, the purpose of which is to give multinational pharmaceutical companies more rights to interfere in the pharmaceutical benefit scheme and other similar schemes in TPP countries. Now, why would a free trade agreement, something that's called a free trade agreement, include such an annex? It's insane, and this is in addition to the ISDS provisions that will already allow multinational corporations to sue governments for laws they don't like and court decisions they don't like. And it's in addition to the IP chapter, which extends the terms of the patents and the copyright. Right. There is another agreement, which is the mirror agreement of the TPP, which is between the EU and the US. It's called the TTIP. It's the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. That's right, I can see Anna there. You can help me out if I get it wrong. Now the EU has, because of the public outcry over this in the EU and in the US, the EU has committed to releasing the text of the TTIP equivalent of the TTIP before signing. And that is something I think that we have to absolutely demand of our government. So we want to see some evidence of benefit to Australia, overall benefit, not just to specific small segments of agriculture. We want to see the text of the agreement before it's signed so that we can have a community discussion on it. But the single worst aspect of the TPP, and this is my third point, is the investment chapter and the investor-state dispute settlement clauses. Because, as I said, these are clauses that allow foreign companies to sue countries for laws, regulations, and even court decisions that they believe will impact upon their profits in any area, whether it's health, environment, labour regulations, food labelling, quality and safety standards. Now that's why the former Labor government was not prepared to sign an agreement with Korea, because it had the ISDS clause in it. Even John Howard did not sign the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement with an ISDS clause. He insisted that it be removed before that was signed. So that correct decision by John Howard could be about to be reversed, with Australia signing up to the TPP, which contains an ISDS clause to which the US is a party. And this is very significant because it is by and large US corporations that are the majority of the litigants in these private tribunals. Now, Philip Morris, you may have heard about this case. Philip Morris is currently suing Australia for our plain packaging laws under an obscure Hong Kong investment agreement that Australia signed a long time ago. And these laws, plain packaging laws, were passed by both Houses of Parliament with bipartisan support. They've been upheld in the High Court of Australia, and yet Philip Morris can go to a private international tribunal and challenge the laws there and say, well, no, this is going to impact upon our profits. Now, even if Australia was to win that case in the private tribunal, it will have to pay its own legal costs, and those costs so far, you may have seen in the paper, are already up to $50 million. Now, in that private briefing that MPs got a couple of months ago from the department, I asked the question, under the provisions of the TPP as currently drafted, could the Philip Morris scenario still happen? And they said yes. So even though they claim that they are putting in all sorts of caveats and carve-outs to make sure that we can still regulate, their own officials were saying, actually no, that's not happening. They'll still be able to sue. Philip Morris is currently suing Uruguay for its anti-tobacco measures, which could bankrupt that country. Philip Morris is bigger than Uruguay in terms of its financial position. Philip Morris's net revenue last year was $67 billion, while Uruguay's GDP, $50 billion. New Zealand has now been deterred from introducing plain packaging laws of its own. So ISDS clauses can have a terribly chilling effect on government's regulation. A Swedish company is suing Germany because it decided to phase out nuclear power after the Fukushima disaster. The French Veolia Corporation is suing the Egyptian government for having the temerity to raise the minimum wage. Canada is being sued by pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly after the Canadian Supreme Court ruled 2 of its medicine patents invalid because they were ineffective. Canada is being sued by US Mining Corporation because Quebec ordered a moratorium on fracking pending an environmental review. That's just a few of the many of the more than 580 so cases currently on foot in investor-state dispute settlement tribunals. Now, you might be surprised to know that these cases are not being heard by respected independent international tribunals of judges. They are being heard by panels of lawyers who can be advocates for multinationals one month and panel members adjudicating other cases the next month. Their decisions are not transparent, they apply no precedent, and they're not appealable. Now, there's Juan Fernandez Armesto, an arbitrator from Spain, made this observation about the process. When I wake up at night and think about arbitration, it never ceases to amaze me that sovereign states have agreed to investment arbitration at all. 3 private individuals are entrusted with the power to review, without any restrictions or appeal procedure, all actions of the government, all decisions of the courts, and all laws and regulations emanating from Parliament. Last year, Chief Justice French of the High Court of Australia. Again, not a person from a lefty troublemaker. Apparently actually ran for the seat of Fremantle many years ago, federal seat of Fremantle. He always says that to me whenever he sees me. He finds it funny. For the Liberal Party. So anyway.
His brother ran for Parliament.
His brother did too, right. So anyway, Chief Justice French of the High Court of Australia last year in a public speech highlighted his concerns about the impact of ISDS clauses on our judicial system when he quoted an American professor regarding the Eli Lilly case against Canada. This is what he said. After losing 2 cases before the appellate courts of a Western democracy, should a disgruntled foreign multinational pharmaceutical company be free to take that country to private arbitration, claiming that its expectation of monopoly profits had been thwarted by the court's decision? Should governments continue to negotiate treaty agreements where expansive intellectual property-related investor rights and investor-state dispute settlement are enshrined into hard law? Now, the government likes to talk about its success in achieving deals with other countries. But of course we know that you can reach any agreement with any country if you are prepared to sign anything, which includes giving away your country's sovereignty, and that is what is happening. Now, Andrew Robb gets up and talks about the marvellous exemptions that he's negotiating. Mind you, they haven't been agreed. They're still in draft in the text, and so there's only 2% of the text left to go. These things are still in draft. I don't know what the chances are of them actually getting up. But anyway, the government has sought specific exemptions from ISDS for the PBS, Medicare, TGA and the Gene Technology Regulator. But as I said, those things are in brackets in the text. And it does beg the question, if specific exemptions from ISDS are needed for these bodies, what other Australian institutions could be exposed to ISDS? And what about future environmental regulation and internet regulation and the proposed legislation for food labelling in the wake of the contaminated berries scandal? And even if the exemptions are agreed, they may not be effective. There are a number of examples where these so-called exemptions in trade agreements for public health or environmental regulation have not deterred investors from suing, and where tribunals have ignored the intended limitations. So there's a case of the US Renco lead mining company against Peru, where they are suing the Peruvian government for damages because a court ordered that lead mining company to clean up its lead pollution. Now, this is despite a supposed carve-out for environmental regulation in the ISDS clause in the US-Peru Free Trade Agreement. So that case is going on regardless of so-called carve-outs. Now, this whole thing is free market corporatisation gone mad. Nobel Prize winner for economics, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, has said they are creating a new private judicial system only available to corporations, not to civil society. So this ISDS litigation is a one-way street. Only multinational corporations can sue, governments can't sue, civil society can't sue, only corporations can. And only foreign corporations. Domestic corporations don't get the same benefit. So the bottom line has to be, we do not accept investor-state dispute settlement clauses, full stop. So the 3 things that we are demanding are transparency on the text and an opportunity for the community to see it before it's signed off, some evidence that this is of benefit, overall benefit to Australia, greater benefit than the considerable disadvantages that are clear, and no ISDS. And even more pertinently, I think we should ask, as a Detroit Democrat did recently, instead of asking about implications for economic growth, I hope my colleagues ask, is this policy good for living standards for the health of the planet, for creating jobs with dignity, promoting peace, and ensuring an educated populace. So, as Scott was saying, there really hasn't been a debate in Australia about this. There's been a huge debate in Europe. There's been a huge debate in the United States. You might have seen some of the shenanigans going on with the vote in the US Congress and Senate over the fast track issue, where you've had US presidential candidate Hillary Clinton coming out against ISDS and calling for the text of the TPP to be released. We've now seen the European Parliament put the talks about the TTIP on hold because of significant concern. The truth is that these so-called free trade agreements stand to undermine the high quality environmental, social, economic, health, workforce standards that we have painstakingly established. The community is entitled to know and have a say about what the government is signing us up to, because this agreement, if signed, does not only manacle the hands of the present government, but it manacles the hands of elected governments into the future. So, Tony Abbott and Andrew Robb don't have a mandate from the people of the future to sign this agreement. And I don't think they'd have a mandate from the people of today if people knew what was actually in the thing. So we've described it as a Trojan horse, essentially, for taking power from the people. A cross-parliamentary working group has been formed with Senator Nick Xenophon, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, Scott's colleague in the Greens, and I as co-chairs. And we're working together with the many groups and organisations and individuals within the academia, within the public health movement and choice, AFDNet, the ACTU. There's a huge movement among those groups, but the message has to get out more widely to the Australian community. So that's what this is about, and I echo Scott's comments that we need to move on to talk about that once we've finished here. So I'll just hand over now to Janet. All right, cheers.
Which we know very little about, except that we feel with the introduction of the ISDS, which from reading about what's been said in America, they feel that there's every chance it could be introduced, and so my concerns are basically about that and how it could affect our food security, our food sovereignty and food safety. Now, although Andrew Robb has said, oh look, we've already got ISDS agreements with already happening, none of those are with the US. And as Melissa said, they are the chief litigators when it comes to pushing their rights through ISDS agreements. In fact, 98%, I believe, are driven by US multinationals. So to go into an ISDS with them, I'm really fearful for our food future, actually. As Melissa said, they've already been, we've got the Philip Morris affair that's happening at the moment, and they've gone through the back door to try and get that happening because we didn't have an agreement with America at the time. So I just don't think anything will stop them when it comes to wanting to push an ISDS agreement through whatever reason. So, well, first of all, food sovereignty, that's one of my biggest concerns, because we already have a threat with our food sovereignty. Our food system is broken, and the white paper that's just come out has really not fixed the problem at all. One of the biggest problems we have with is the sovereignty we have over our seeds. Now, this isn't just based in Australia, this is a worldwide threat to seed sovereignty. In 2012, the EU Plant Reproductive Material Law was released, and what it basically says is that you can't own, share, develop or grow your own seeds unless they are on a specific list, a commercial list. In order to get your seeds onto that list, you have to pay vast amounts of money for them to be recognised, analysed, recognised and put onto a list. So all of the people that share seeds in seed savers groups and such like, or grow their own veggies, and farmers that even, you know, might produce their own seeds, that sort of thing is under threat. Now, it's not just in Europe that that's been introduced. They also have, or tried to introduce it into Colombia 2 years ago, where they said the same thing. The government wanted to control the seeds there, and they said to the farmers who have been saving their seeds for thousands of years that you can't grow, save, share, or develop your own seeds. And it led to an absolutely awful national strike that ended up with about 12 people dying. Hundreds were injured because it was a massive insult to the farmers that have been, you know, sort of looking after their seeds and taking away their sovereignty, the ability to feed themselves. That's what it's all about, you know, the right to grow your own food and to feed yourself. That's what's at risk. And we've just seen it introduced in Africa. Now, it was pushed through the G8 New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition. How wonderful does that sound? And the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. So what they've done is introduced African regional intellectual property organisations, to which no NGOs were invited. So this was all done through industrial groups and government groups. And the same sort of thing we can see rolling across is the inability to save, share, sow or produce your own seed. That hasn't arrived here yet, but what they are doing is putting a massive pressure on organic food here in Australia. Now, we've seen a push from the WA government to try and allow a 0.9% GM contamination rate in organic standards. At the moment, we have the best organic standards in the world, basically. We have zero tolerance for GM in organics. But the WA government, realising that now they've introduced GM canola into WA, they can't control it, so therefore organics is in the way. In fact, the organic sector is the biggest threat to the GM sector. In fact, it's a huge threat to the industrial idea of agriculture. So it has to be got rid of, and this is one way they're trying to do it. They've tried in other parts of the world, but we are standing firm. So we had the WA government trying to introduce contamination into organic standards. That didn't work. That was rejected. So next we have the push coming from the industry itself, with the ACO, the Australian Certified Organic Group, wanting to introduce or lower the standards to allow GM contamination in organics. That has stopped, I believe. And now we have the grains industry of WA. They have now also come out trying to do the same. So we already have our food sovereignty under threat. And by introducing the ISDS, I just think it's going to be really bad for us, but I'll go on to that in a minute. What it's all about is removing our choices. So the thing is, if we're not going to be feeding ourselves, we're going to be relying on other people, clearly. And as Henry Kissinger said, if you control the food, you control the people. The ownership of seed and the patenting of GM seeds is a huge concern. Will the ISDS commit us to importing food that we actually don't want to be importing? That's the problem. Last year, the grape growers in northern WA, they were threatened with the invasion of Californian grapes. Suddenly there were these cheap grapes in the supermarkets and they were really suffering. And they were saying, well, how can WA allow, sort of grapes to come in knowing that we've our livelihood is under threat, and they were told, well, it's a trade agreement. They have to be allowed in. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that we're going to be faced with. Regarding an ISDS, Dr. Gleeson from La Trobe University said, signing the TPP with ISDS in place risks opening the floodgates to costly litigation. Now, we've heard that they might modify this ISDS, but she said we're not convinced that even a modified version will provide sufficient protection for health and environmental policies. The best way to defend Australia's right to regulate is to stand our ground and continue to say no to ISDS in the TPP, because it's all about ownership and control. And lastly is food safety. If we can't grow our own food, we have to import it. Who's determining the safety of that food that we're bringing in? Now, Senator Bill Heffron, he's been raising concerns, and he's specifically been worried about the beef that we might be importing from the US, because he knows that they have lower standards when it comes to BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. And he warns that we are selling out Australia's clean green export reputation on beef just to appease Australia's long-suffering sugar farmers. So he can see that actually, you know, well, if we let the beef in at a lower standard, perhaps they'll take our sugar. So this to and froing. And he says that the US is wanting us to lower our standards to theirs so they don't lose market share if they do get a BSE reactor. Even Barnaby Joyce has come out and said the same, although he does say he has faith in Rob to do the right thing. Now, in America at the moment, they are doing everything they can to prevent genetically modified food being labelled. So much so that they're trying to rush through a bill at the moment called, what's it called? The Safe and Accurate Food Labelling Act of 2015, which is, it's nothing at all to do with that at all. What it's basically saying is, well, if you can't prove it's not safe, then it doesn't have to be labelled. And it's called, people have referred to it as the DARK Act, which is the Denying Americans the Right to Know. Now, if that goes through, and those foods do not have to be labelled, and then we are forced to import them, and we want to label them, under an ISDS, that labelling will be seen as a threat to potential profits by the likes of Monsanto or whoever owns that food. And so we will not be able to label it. Now, there's a new generation of GM foods coming out at the moment, and they're not even, in America, they're not even going to refer to them as GM, because their present idea of genetically modified food is where you transfer genes from one unrelated species to another. With this new generation, they're just tweaking the genes within that plant or animal, and they refer to it as gene editing. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you change the blueprint of something, you have genetically engineered it. But they are proposing that because it's not transgenic, it therefore does not have to be labelled. And they're talking about genetically engineering animals, which are beefier or they don't grow horns or whatever, unlabelled, not referred to as being genetically engineered. And then, of course, they would possibly be exported and we would not be any the wiser. So there's huge dangers about this sort of thing. And if we do decide that we want to reject cattle that glows in the dark or whatever, because we don't think it's safe, believe me, that's what they are making. Recently, they discovered that a lamb that was crossed with a fluorescent jellyfish gene, it did glow in the dark, went missing. It ended up in the French food chain somehow. And, you know, that human error, this is what we're fighting, human error. But anyway, so if we did decide that we didn't want to, would an ISDS commit us to taking it? That's the problem. So food sovereignty, which is already under threat, food security, and food safety. Those are my three worries if this comes to happen. Thank you.